My name is Emily. I'm 24 years old. I spent countless exhausting hours working part-time jobs to build my $3,600 PC, the greatest source of pride in my life. But after just one weekend back home, I discovered it had been sold by my parents to fund a shopping spree for my younger brother, Mason. The feeling of betrayal wasn't really about the money or the PC itself. It was about the fact that in their eyes, I've always been just the shadow, the one who has to sacrifice. Have you ever had to choose between your family and your own self-worth? Share your story in the comments. I genuinely want to hear about your experiences and what you've gone through. I grew up in a typical American family in the suburbs of Indiana, a place where everything looked neat and peaceful on the outside, but beneath the surface lay layers of conflict that no one wanted to name. My father is a traditional man, a railroad engineer for 30 years. He's straightforward, strict, and the rules he sets are absolute and must be followed by everyone. My mother is gentle, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who always makes dinner for the whole family by hand every evening. She's my father's emotional anchor, but she's also the one who always reminded me, no matter what, that as a daughter, I needed to give way to my little brother, to put the good of the family above all else. That's what I heard over and over throughout my childhood, so much so that sometimes I wondered if I really existed just to be an example, a good, big sister. Always giving in, always carrying the weight for my brother, Mason, the one the whole family cherished as if he were some precious treasure. Mason is 4 years younger than me and has always been the center of everyone's attention. When Mason was little, my parents used to joke that all their efforts in raising kids went into me so that I could set an example for my brother. They said it in a gentle, affectionate tone, but I knew what it really meant. Whenever Mason got into trouble, I was the one who took the blame, or at the very least, I was made responsible. Back in elementary school, every time Mason broke something, my mom would scold me. Why weren't you watching your brother? When Mason got a bad grade, my dad would turn to me and ask, your brother's grades are slipping, why didn't you remind him to study? I got used to being called into the living room whenever anything went wrong in the house. I got used to my parents defending Mason for every reason imaginable. He's the only son, he's sensitive, he needs encouragement, while I, as the eldest daughter, was expected to sacrifice. My memories of important moments are all tied to Mason being prioritized, while I quietly faded into the background. My 18th birthday, I only had a simple family dinner because Mason was preparing for a basketball tournament, so my parents had to spend all their time driving him to practice and cheering him on. When Mason graduated high school, my parents threw a huge party, invited the entire extended family while I quietly cleaned up the kitchen and made a cake for my brother myself. Any achievements, I had a second-place award in a design contest, an article published in the local community website, were only met with my mother's nod. That's good, you're a good girl, immediately followed by, sometimes I think, if I weren't there, things would still go on just the same, except my brother would have to learn to take responsibility for himself a little sooner. I'm not the type to give up easily. I love computers, programming, and figuring out new graphics software, things my parents see as girl stuff or, worse, a waste of time. Even so, I quietly worked at the school library, took on small freelance gigs online, and every dollar I earned was carefully saved. I told myself one day I would build something of my own. That's why the PC, the one I put together after 3 years of saving, each part carefully ordered, checked, assembled with my own hands, meant so much to me. But effort doesn't always get recognized. My father never truly cared about my passion for technology. To him, a daughter learning programming or design was just a phase one that would eventually end in marriage, children, and settling down to care for a family. Nothing to get worked up about. Every time I shared with my mom about a new project, about the joy of conquering a difficult algorithm on my own, she would smile gently, but always reminded me, girls need to take care. I never felt the gap between Mason and me so clearly as in those moments, when every bit of effort I made was dismissed, while even an average achievement from Mason was enough to make my parents beam with pride and brag to everyone. Every time there was conflict in the house, big or small, the outcome was always the same. I was the one who had to back down, to set an example, to give in to my brother, never allowed to raise my voice or show any negative emotion. That kind of self-restraint became instinctual, so much so that I often didn't even know how to express my sadness, my anger, or simply the growing sense of injustice inside me. I once hoped that, if I just tried hard enough, one day my family would be proud of me, would see me as an irreplaceable part of the family. But the older I got, the more I realized, in my parents' eyes, I was just a shadow, the one who had to sacrifice for my brother's happiness, and I accepted that as a fact of life. If there's one thing that set me apart from Mason, it's that I learned to be independent at a very young age. Every need I had, no matter how small, had to be carefully considered before I could bring it up with my parents, because I knew that most of the best things in our home were reserved for my brother. Growing up in that house, I learned to read everyone's moods, to know when to keep quiet, when to take the short end of the stick just to keep the peace. Because of that, I matured faster than my peers, juggling school and a part-time job at the city library from my freshman year of college. The job wasn't hard, but it was enough for me to start saving up my very first money for the dream of building a real, powerful computer, not just for school or work, but to help me broaden my horizons, do the things I loved. Of course, my efforts were hardly ever acknowledged by my family. There was one time I designed a logo for a coffee shop and received my very first $200, 0 cents check. I told my mom about it, excited, but she just laughed it off. "You're just doing it for fun. Don't make a big deal of it. School is what really matters." Even when my project was published on the school website, my dad barely glanced at it before nodding indifferently, still choosing to spend all his free time watching football with Mason, discussing the latest matches, or planning trips just for the two of them. Sometimes I felt left out and wondered how much harder I would have to try before my parents took what I did seriously, before they would talk about something other than Mason whenever we had guests. I used to think maybe I just needed one special occasion to prove my worth, so I planned on signing up for a women's tech competition, hoping I could make a mark that would make my parents genuinely proud of me. Night after night, I sat reading instructions, teaching myself to code, discussing with friends in online communities, even taking on extra hours at the library to save up for the registration fee and related expenses. I knew for sure my parents wouldn't be willing to pay for a game they never acknowledged. While I was preparing for the competition, Mason was rewarded by my parents with a trip to California with his friends, so he could broaden his horizons, because boys should have experience. When Mason was away, the house felt so quiet, almost as if my parents talked about me even less, as if all their concerns simply went on pause, waiting for my brother to return. I took advantage of those times to work nonstop, taking on more design contracts, saving every penny. After 3 years, when I'd finally saved enough, I made a list of the best parts, ordered each item to our house myself, and spent an entire weekend assembling my very first computer with my own hand. Not everyone understands the happiness in that. Every single screw, every cable, every graphics card I touched was the result of years telling myself, just hang in there a little longer. When the machine finally booted up, I felt tears well up. I finally had something that truly belonged to me, something nobody could take away. Or so I thought. I still remember that night, showing my accomplishment to my mom, hoping she'd be proud, that she'd call my dad over to see it and say something encouraging. But she just glanced at the computer screen and sighed. "It's good for girls to be into technology, but remember to spend some time cooking with me. When you get married, you can't bury yourself in a computer like this anymore." Her words were gentle, but they weighed heavy on my heart. I knew nobody in my family would ever truly be interested in what I did, but I still couldn't stop dreaming about the day they would see me for who I really am, not just as my brother's shadow. My family's indifference became even clearer whenever I had small successes. The first article I wrote about my experience learning programming at college was published on a Women in Tech news site. I printed it out and placed it on the dining table, hoping someone would notice. But when dinner began, my dad just asked, Did Mason call home today? And then moved on to talking about plans for buying a new car for my brother, while my mom was busy preparing desserts for Mason to take to his weekend party. Every time that happened, I told myself to try even harder, as if with enough effort things would have to change someday. These moments of exclusion and being dismissed happened so often they became scars inside me. When I suggested the family come to the launch event for my tech project, my mom said, "It's not good for girls to be out running around. Focus on doing your chores well, and we'll talk about it later." That reminder made me realize, again, I learned to swallow my sadness, confiding only in Sharon, the only person who truly understood and cared about me. She once told me, "Emily, girls aren't born just to endure or be a backdrop for someone else's spotlight. Your hard work is precious, whether or not anyone else sees it." So I grew up that way, always striving, even if only I knew, only I recognized it, only I dared believe that one day my family would really see I was capable of things far greater than they ever imagined. That night, after a long shift at the library, I came home to a house quieter than usual. There was no Mason's music, no smell of my mom's freshly baked cakes. Just the yellow living room light reflecting off the family portrait hanging on the wall, where I'm forcing a smile beside my brother and parents, both of whom are gazing at Mason as if he's the only son in their world. I went straight up to the second floor, pulled open the door to my workspace, and froze. The room was completely empty. My desk stood bare, and where my painstakingly built computer used to sit, there was only a faint mark in the dust on the wood. Mouse, keyboard, monitor, the PC case, everything was gone without a trace, as if someone had just stuffed it all into a bag and made it vanish from the world in an instant. I couldn't believe it, thinking maybe I was seeing things or someone was playing a prank, so I rushed downstairs to find my mother. My mother was sitting at the dining table, her eyes glued to her phone. My father stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee while watching sports news. When I asked, "Where's my computer?" my mom put her phone down, her tone as calm as if she were talking about a new grocery item. "Oh, we sold it. Mason needed money to go shopping for a party with his friends. You can always buy another computer later, but opportunities like this for Mason's youth only come once." Her words were as light as a feather, but they stabbed straight into my heart like a cold blade. I tried to keep my composure and asked again, "How could you sell my property without asking me first?" My father turned around, his eyes rigid. "Money in this house, everything belongs to the family. Your brother needs it more." I felt my throat go dry, anger and helplessness rising and swelling inside me. I pointed at the handrail on the stairs where I'd put a sticker back in high school that said, "Emily's room do not touch," and said, "That was something I worked for, 3 years of part-time jobs, every dollar, every part I ordered and assembled and learned on my own. How could you just treat it like it's everyone's, sell it off for Mason?" My mom avoided my gaze, quietly saying, "This party with Mason's friends is really important. There will be people who could help his future. A computer isn't a big deal for a girl, you can always buy another one later." Mason walked in from outside, holding a flashy designer bag, a big grin on his face, completely unfazed by how I looked. He patted me on the shoulder. "It's just a computer, sis, I promise. Next time I'll take you out to dinner to make it up to you." I turned and looked at him, a surge of resentment rising in me like never before. I'd given up so much for Mason, shared even my favorite childhood toys, given him the best seat in the car, quietly stepped out of activities whenever my parents needed to focus on him. But this time, what I lost wasn't just a possession, but years of effort, my yearning for recognition, and that fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I was as deserving of love as my brother. That whole night I tossed and turned on my cold bed. There was no more gentle hum of my computer, no more feeling of being myself in the little space that was mine alone. I thought about every dollar I'd saved, every late night spent finishing contracts, every tiny dream of one day having my whole family applaud my success. And now, all of it was swept away by a single decision from my parents, an unconditional preference for Mason. I wanted to cry, but no tears came, only a deep, hollow sense of loneliness and disappointment. The next morning, sitting down at the breakfast table, I faced my parents again and tried to speak clearly, word by word. I want to know who decided to sell my computer, how much you sold it for, and why nobody even asked me, not even once. My mom sighed. You're the eldest. You should give way to your brother. Everything in this house belongs to all of us. Mason needed it more. My dad added, if you want, when you start earning money, you can buy another one. Boys need support more at this stage. Felt like a stranger in the house where I'd lived for 24 years, looking at Mason, who stared at the table, pretending not to care, but I knew he didn't feel the slightest guilt. Maybe in everyone's eyes, I was meant to be the silent shadow behind him forever. That sense of being shattered. This was the first time I truly realized I'd never really belonged to this family. Every effort, every dream, every accomplishment of mine was just something to be sacrificed whenever Mason needed or wanted anything. The things I'd guarded all through my youth, the fragile hope for recognition, for the day my family would be proud of me. Now all of it vanished like smoke, leaving nothing but an empty, lost, and more helpless Emily than ever before. The days after that, I lived like a ghost in my own home. I'd wake up earlier than my mom just to avoid seeing anyone. I'd come home late and slip quietly into my room, only to be faced with the cold void where my beloved PC used to sit. Design projects piled up in my email, regular clients kept asking why I was submitting files late, small partners had to be refused or asked for extensions because I couldn't run heavy software on my ancient laptop. Every time I opened it, I just hoped it wouldn't freeze or shut down suddenly, but I'd never felt so powerless. Years of hard-won independence, and everything collapsed after a single decision that I never even got to weigh in on. My mother stayed as gentle as ever, only asking whenever I passed by the kitchen, "Have you eaten yet? Remember to get some sleep." Sometimes she'd make the desserts I liked, but she never once brought up the computer again. My dad kept coming home from work, sitting in front of the TV with Mason, talking about sports matches and making new plans for the most promising son in the family. Mason himself seemed more carefree than ever, busy with his new clothes, parties with friends, and endless check-in photos flooding his social media. He only asked me once, "Are you still mad? I think you'll be able to buy another computer soon anyway. Don't make a big deal out of it, sis." Hearing that, I could only let out a dry, bitter laugh. I didn't even have the energy to be angry anymore. It was as if all my outrage had solidified into stone inside me. There were nights I stayed up not because of unfinished homework or projects, but because I couldn't stop replaying one question in my mind. If I disappeared, would anyone actually care? Or would it just be a relief to my parents and Mason, more space for them to go on with their lives, just the way they want? Some afternoons, I'd stand in front of the mirror and not even recognize myself. My eyes were dark with exhaustion, my cheeks hollow from missed meals, my shoulders always slumped from carrying a burden that youth had never let me put down. I called Sharon, my older friend whom I considered a second mother, maybe the only person in the world right now who truly understood me. After listening to my story, she was silent for a long while and then asked, "Emily, what do you think you still need to prove to them? Girls aren't born just to endure or sacrifice. You have the right to protect yourself, to ask questions, to say no to unfairness. If you don't stand up for yourself, then who will?" I sat down on the floor, tears streaming at that question. How many years had I spent in silence, always patient, always giving way to my brother, living for the happiness and approval of my parents, without ever once thinking about my own joy, my own rights. That night, I rummaged through old photos and chat logs from when I was a teenager. The bright smile of a girl who once believed in miracles, who thought that as long as she tried her best, she'd be recognized, loved, just like Mason. But now that magic had disappeared. I thought about all those years spent working part-time, the excitement of every paycheck like winning the world's greatest prize. I remembered the pride of building my first PC, the moment it booted up, the RGB lights shining like a reward for every effort. Those small dreams were just memories now, and I wondered how much longer I could endure. At family dinners, I no longer wanted to say anything. Whenever Mason showed off a new outfit or talked about a new trip, I just nodded, avoided my mom's eyes, and ignored my dad's reminders about my duties as the big sister. Or would everyone just feel more comfortable, more at peace, no longer having to face my differences? I started to think about leaving home. The thought was scary, but strangely, it brought a sense of relief. For the first time, I pictured a small apartment, my own workspace, a life where I didn't have to be compared to anyone, no longer Mason's shadow. But then the fear would return. I'd never lived on my own. My savings were gone after buying the computer, and what little I had left wouldn't last long. If I moved out, how would I manage? If I failed, would I dare to come back? And after everything, could I really let go of the dutiful big sister role to become a new Emily, living just for myself? The days that followed, I was trapped in that cycle of self-doubt. The outside world seemed so distant, while this house felt smaller and more suffocating than ever. I knew I couldn't live like this forever, but how could I find the courage to leave when some tiny hope still lingered, that someday, my parents would see my worth, would call me daughter with all the pride they reserved for Mason. In all that inner turmoil, I realized I was standing on the border between my past and my future, between wounds that hadn't yet healed and the longing to finally live as my true self. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I knew that if I didn't dare to step through this pain, I'd always remain just a faint shadow in my own life. That night, after a long phone call with Sharon, I sat alone at my desk, staring at the empty space where my PC used to be, and wondered if this was the moment to start living for myself instead of endlessly sacrificing in silence. I remembered Sharon's words, "You've done enough for everyone to recognize your worth. Now is the time for you to acknowledge it yourself." That echoed in my mind, stronger than any advice my mother had ever given, and for the first time, I decided I wouldn't wait for a miracle from my family any longer. Quietly, I gathered every invoice, every transfer slip, even photos I'd taken of the 3-year process building my computer. I carefully organized each piece of evidence into a folder, then scanned everything and emailed it to my parents and the person who had bought my PC through the classified site. In the email, I stated clearly, this was my legal personal property, built with my own income, not family property. I requested to be compensated for its full value, otherwise I would seek legal protection for my rights. After sending the email, I felt both shaky and relieved. The atmosphere at home turned heavy as soon as my parents received it. My mother avoided me, only muttering, "Why do you have to make such a big deal out of it? Everything in our family is always for each other." My father was angrier, saying I was ruining the family's reputation, that a woman shouldn't make demands for personal rights, especially over useless technology. But I didn't back down. I replied calmly, "I'm an adult and can take responsibility for myself. This was my hard work, and nobody has the right to take it away without my permission." Mason walked by, shrugged, and said, "You really want to make a big deal over some tech stuff. If you need, I'll just buy you a new laptop next time." I didn't respond, just quietly got back to my own work because I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself, nobody else would do it for me. A few days later, the buyer of the PC got back in touch. He was understanding and agreed to sell the computer back to me at a slightly higher price so he wouldn't lose money. But there was a problem. Mason had removed the hard drive for fun, because he liked messing around with tech. Hearing that, I wasn't even surprised anymore. There was just a wave of sadness and disappointment. All my work, my design files, my projects, who knew where they were now, or if they'd been deleted or used without my knowledge. The moment I got the computer back, I checked every part and found the hard drive was missing. My worst fear realized. I asked Mason, and he just laughed. "I wanted to try it out for some school projects. If you need it back, just take it. But there can't be anything that important on it, right?" His answer made me realize I needed to take much more control over my life. Couldn't let anyone carelessly violate what I'd worked so hard to protect. That night, I sat looking at the empty shell of my computer, telling myself that even if I had to start from scratch, I would never let anyone take my dreams away again. I reopened my to-do list, find a small rental, reorganize my work, reach out to former clients. even consider selling a few things I barely used just to have enough for a deposit. In the following days, I took every spare moment to search for a room, asked friends, and finally found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, just enough space for one person to live. And holding the signed lease in my hand, I felt both nervous and excited, as if I was about to step into a brand new life, one where I would get to decide everything for myself. The day before I moved out, I packed my belongings, sorting through every book, every little trinket, gathering all the mementos of my childhood. There was a sense of regret, but also hope. I sent Sharon a message, "I'm going to start over this time, for myself." She replied, "I'm proud of you, Emily. Your courage will inspire more people than you think." I loaded my computer into the car and looked back at my room one last time. Maybe my parents and Mason would never fully understand my pain, but I knew that life only truly means something when you dare to live for yourself. I started the car, heading toward the future, carrying with me all the lessons, the scars, and the dreams that had never stopped burning in my heart. The first days in my new apartment, I still couldn't quite believe I'd actually stepped out of my family's shadow. That first morning, waking up without my mom knocking on my door to remind me to eat breakfast, without Mason's laughter echoing from the next room, I felt both relief and loneliness. But as I looked around the little apartment, I realized this was a space I chose, everything here arranged by my own. For the first time, I tasted real freedom, even if I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Yet inside me, there was still one huge worry. The lost hard drive, the creative projects and biggest designs I'd poured months of my life into, not knowing where they were or if they'd all been wiped out. I started asking Mason about the hard drive, but he brushed me off, saying he'd used it for a school project and couldn't remember where he'd put it. His evasiveness made me uneasy. A week later, while scrolling social media, I stumbled upon a post that was being shared widely in the young startup community. Mason's group had just won the school's tech startup competition, with a product featuring a full brand identity and a prototype app for education. Just one look at the designs and my heart stopped. The logo, colors, visual style, everything was the original work I'd created for an international project I'd been nurturing for so long. Under Mason's group's name, all my creative ideas had been turned into his team's achievement. I was stunned. For several minutes, I just sat staring at the photos Mason had posted on the school page. Him grinning proudly with the trophy, his teammates holding up a banner with graphics I had drawn myself. I trembled with anger, feeling a sense of betrayal that went beyond material loss. This was about trust, about honor, about dream. I'd thought losing my PC meant losing everything, but it turned out what I lost most was my own creative achievements, taken by my own family without a word of permission. That night, I sent Mason a message and asked directly, "Why did you take my designs? Do you have any idea how long I worked on them, how much they meant to me?" Mason replied with a string of brief texts, at first denying it, saying he only referenced my files, then shifting the blame to his teammates. "My friends took it from the hard drive. We needed it urgently. We didn't think it mattered that much to you." I was choked with emotion. Those justifications were all too familiar, echoing the excuses my parents always used for Mason. "It's just borrowing. It's to help your brother. You're the older sister. What's the harm in giving in a little?" I couldn't sleep all night, torn between anger and helplessness. But this time I refused to stay silent. I sent all my intellectual property proof to the contest organizers, explaining the design process, attaching source files, dated emails, and screenshots of every step. I also wrote to the administrators at Mason School, explaining the situation and requesting verification. In my letter, there was no resentment, just the simple statement: every creative idea carries the effort and belief of its creator. If those things are stolen, I believe it's necessary to speak up, not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever been overlooked. The news spread quickly. The organizers got back to me, confirming Mason's group had committed a serious copyright violation. The school launched an internal investigation. My family was thrown into chaos. My mother called me in a panic. Emily, by doing this, you're ruining Mason's life. Can't you just forgive him this once? He only wanted to prove himself to your dad, to everyone. It was the same old chorus. For Mason, for the family, the eldest sister must sacrifice. My dad texted, "If this blows up, our family's reputation will be ruined. Stop now, everything will be fine." But for me, it was time to break the cycle. I couldn't keep living with the feeling that I always had to give way, always had to bury my dreams and creativity just to protect my brother's and my family's perfect image. For the first time, I calmly replied to my mother. I knew that after this decision, everything would change. Maybe Mason would resent me, maybe my parents would reject me, but I understood that if I didn't stand up for my own worth, I'd forever remain a shadow in my own life. And I believed that somewhere out there were other women hearing this story who would find the courage to choose themselves, just like I did. I realized that in the moment when all the masks had fallen, I no longer wanted to justify my existence. It wasn't about revenge or making Mason pay a heavy price. His friends were upset. Some reached out hoping I'd forgive Mason, but for the first time, I stood firm. If you don't value fairness, I don't need your sympathy. Meanwhile, my parents were in turmoil. My father, angrier than ever, accused me of dragging the family name through the mud and ruining Mason's future. My mother cried, texting me to withdraw my complaint, saying these things should be settled privately within the family. Those words in the past might have made me hesitate, made me feel guilty, but now, I replied calmly, I can't keep living by sacrificing myself for others' mistakes, nor can I shoulder wounds I didn't create. From now on, I'll live for myself. I met Mason in a small cafe. He arrived looking nervous, unable to meet my eyes. He sat down and mumbled, "Sis, I know I was wrong, but you doing this means I lose everything. I didn't think it would go this far. You need to learn to take responsibility for what you do, Mason. I can't always be here to clean up your mess, and I can't keep being your shadow so you can live freely without facing consequences. You need to stand up for yourself, not for anyone else, but for you." That conversation felt like a sad ending to all the years when my brother and I were close. I knew I would miss it, but I also knew it was time to choose my own path. I packed up the last of my personal things left at the old house, not forgetting to leave my mother a short message. I still love our family, but I can't live my whole life for others. Walking out of the house I'd known for almost 25 years, my heart felt both heavy and strangely light. I didn't know how my parents or Mason would see me from then on, but I knew I would have no regrets. I poured all my energy into work, getting more involved in the community of women in tech. There I met older women who had lived through loss, who had been overlooked or underestimated simply because of their gender or their role in the family. Together, we organized sharing sessions on tech skills, financial independence, and self-love as we stepped beyond our youth. I wasn't afraid of loneliness anymore, because I finally understood that a woman's true strength doesn't come from others' approval, but from the confidence to move forward, to say no, to choose what's best for herself, even when that means leaving the embrace of her old family behind. With each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger, more at peace, no longer haunted by Mason's shadow or the standards my family once set for me. The old wounds would ache sometimes, but instead of holding me back, they reminded me of the value of freedom, self-respect, and living my life without needing anyone's permission. The older women in my new circle became my inspiration, each one a story of courage. One divorced at 60 to start over, another learned a trade with 60 to start over. I realized I wasn't alone, and that my decisions, even if they caused storms, were seeds for a life of maturity and independence. I didn't completely cut ties with my family, but I no longer let them manipulate my emotions. I set clear boundaries. I'd only keep in touch when it felt safe, only return home when I truly wanted to, not out of obligation. Whenever my mother called, I listened with a new calm, no longer falling into the old emotional traps. I spoke honestly. "I'm okay, I'm happy with my choices, and I hope you and Dad learn to respect that." Only when I learned to say no to unfairness and protect myself did I truly become the best version of me. And I believe that my story, even if it isn't perfect, will give courage to anyone who ever thought they were just a shadow behind someone else. It's time for each person to write their own story, starting with drawing boundaries for their life. A year has passed since the day I left that old house, and my life has changed more than I ever imagined. At first, nothing was easy. I had to budget tightly, manage the smallest daily difficulties, rent, utility bills, sleepless nights, racing deadlines. Sometimes I would sit quietly, watching my reflection in the mirror, remembering the days of my youth when I silently swallowed tears just to keep the peace, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But day by day, I started to see myself growing up, becoming steadier. Freedom, even with its uncertainty, filled the empty spaces that once ached with insecurity. I threw myself into work, pouring my whole heart into every project, big or small, gradually rebuilding my reputation in the design community. Old clients returned, friends introduced new collaborations, and I realized I could take control of my own life, no longer afraid of being underestimated, no longer having to fade into the background. More importantly, I found a truly special community, a local group of mature women. Women who had once felt as lost as I did, who had been pushed to the margins just because of their age or family expectations. We started a club called Renew, where everyone could learn about technology, digital skills, and personal finance. The kind of topic society still often labels as for the young or for men. In every meeting, I saw the bright eyes of these older women, my new friends, as they learned to send emails, make documents on a computer, or plan a personal project even after turning 60. The laughter in that tiny classroom, each story of someone bravely stepping out of the cycle of sacrifice to rebuild their life, warmed my heart more than any praise I'd ever longed for in the past. One autumn afternoon, my mother called, her voice quieter than usual. She said, "I'm sorry for not understanding you, for not standing by you when I should have. I used to think sacrifice was a woman's instinct, but watching you, I realize everyone deserves to live for themselves." For the first time, I heard my mother talk about her youthful dreams, things she'd never dared pursue. The times she kept silent because I no longer blamed her, only replied gently, "Mom, we still have time. Let's live for ourselves, just once, so there's nothing left to regret." We both went silent. A silence that felt like it spanned lifetimes, but really, all it takes is a single act of courage to cross that threshold. As for Mason, after the consequences at school, he went through a tough time, grew distant from old friends, and lost many privileges. There were times he texted me, sounding more sincere. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I did hurt you so much. I'm having to start all over again." I replied, "It's okay, Mason. We all have to grow up eventually. You'll manage it if you really want to." Between us now, there's not much anger. Just enough forgiveness for us both to move on with lighter hearts. I no longer long for my family's approval the way I once did. Instead, I give myself the right to feel proud of who I am. Every woman over 50 I meet, whether she's a bookstore owner, a widow learning to travel solo for the first time, or a friend who just learned to send her first email, reminds me, no one is born just to be the backdrop for someone else's life, whether as a mother, a wife, a big sister, or a daughter. In a traditional family, every decision to leave, every time we dare to draw a boundary, every time we say, "I deserve more than this," is a step on a healing journey. Looking back, I know I've lost things and been hurt, but I no longer feel regret. Because of those pains, I've learned to love myself, to have self-respect, to start over at any age and in any circumstance. I encourage everyone in the Renew class, it's never too late to become independent, to learn something new, or to give yourself a second chance. Every time I see someone's eyes light up with confidence, I know my journey matters. To anyone who has ever been overlooked, who has sacrificed so much they forgot themselves, I just want to say, you deserve the best, no matter your age, no matter who hurt you in the past. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to live true to your worth. Step boldly out of the shadows, draw your own boundaries, and begin a new life.